Mr. Sanchez joins us.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Good evening, commissioners. I'm calling to order the City of Oxnard Planning Commission regular meeting for Thursday, May 21, 2020. May we have roll call, please?
Chair Frank?
Here.
Vice Chair Sanchez? Vice Chair Sanchez?
He's not on yet.
Commissioner Chavez?
Here.
Commissioner
Daniel?
Dozier?
Here.
Commissioner Fearing?
Here.
Commissioner Meyer?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Fearing, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to
the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Moving to item C on our agenda, public comments. These are comments on items not on our agenda today. Do we have any public comment cards, speakers, correspondence?
Chair Frank, we do not.
Thank you. Close public comment. We'll move to our consent agenda, approval of our May 7, 2020 minutes. Everyone had an opportunity to review.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Chavez.
Yes, Commissioner Chavez.
Just a quick correction. It's very minor, but on item D2 for the vote,
Yes.
The number count was off. E4 instead of E5.
No, it should be including Commissioner Sanchez. Vice Chair Sanchez was present. So with the addition of Commissioner Sanchez, it would be 5. So.
Okay, I apologize. I thought he wasn't there for that part.
Yeah. I have that he was present. Anyway, if someone could check on that.
Chair Frank, this is Scott Kolwitz. We have Vice Chair Sanchez having been present for that vote. So
yes, okay.
It would be a 5-01 vote with the needed addition of Vice Chair Sanchez's name.
Exactly. Thank you so much. All right, so I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Who seconded, please?
Commissioner Dozier.
Okay. Motion by Frank, second by Dozier to approve the minutes. Can I have a roll call, please?
Chair Frank?
Yes.
Commissioner Dozier?
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez?
Yes.
Commissioner Fearing?
Abstain, I wasn't here.
Commissioner Meyer?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Moving to item D on our agenda, ex parte declarations for public hearing items. Anybody have any ex parte communications concerning our one public hearing this evening? I haven't had any.
No, I haven't had any.
None for me.
No ex
None
parte
from
communication.
Commissioner
Okay, thank you. We'll move to item F1. This is a public hearing. The project name is the CEQA Farms Business Park Tentative Tract Map and Development Agreement. Planning and zoning permit numbers PZ 20-67-01 is the development agreement. 20-300-01 is the tentative subdivision map, and 20-650-01 is the road name. Our planner, Mr. Kolwitz, will be doing the presentation. Mr. Kolwitz.
Thank you, Chair Frank, and members of the Planning Commission joining us this evening. I'm actually going to do a quick introduction and then hand it off to some contract staff that are on here on this call with us. But in effect, the CEQA Farms Business Park is a long-term vision of the city that we are now trying to implement. Back in the 1980s, this area of the city, the 1,400-acre northeast industrial area, started a planning effort anticipating various light industrial and other business park uses to be developed in this area. Since that point in time, there have been a few specific plans that have been adopted. Specifically, the McInnes Ranch Business Park specific plan was adopted in the late 1980s. The Camino Real Business Park specific plan was adopted in 2008, and then the CEQA Farms Business Park specific plan was adopted in 2012. And all of those were trying to move forward the whole notion of light industrial development in this sector of town. Specifically in 2012, with the adoption of the CEQA Farms Business Park specific plan, it anticipated a total of 8.5 million square feet of development on a 430-acre parcel. It anticipated the needed infrastructure that would need to occur, and it also recognized this site as a gateway to the city. Along with that effort, there was an environmental impact report that was certified, and a statement of overriding considerations was adopted to highlight the economic generation that this would bring to the city. So all in all, we're going to share that story with you tonight, and in particular how this project before you is consistent with that vision, as well as how it implements implements that specific plan. Tonight, we're going to have Sarah Lejeune from Rincon Consulting provide the presentation to you. She's also joined by Sally Schiffman, who helped with the environmental document that was included in your packet tonight. And in addition to that, we have a team of city staff members from departments across the city that are here to assist with any questions that are provided tonight. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and send over the presentation to Ms. Sarah Lejeune.
Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Sarah Lejeune, and I'm a contract planner with Rincon Consultants, working with city staff very closely on this project. And I'm happy to be here and meet all of you. This is my first meeting in Oxnard.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. And I'm just going to go ahead, and then we'll take questions. And yeah, there's many pieces to this project, and I'm going to try and be as thorough as possible, but we can always go back and answer questions when there are, raised by the report. Okay, I think Michelle, I'm ready for the next slide. So we made a little outline because there are a lot of pieces here, and so I'm going to start right now with the background, the context, and the project description, a little, building off of what Scott said. And then we'll move on to the specific components of what you have before you, which are the development agreement, the tentative map, CEQA consistency analysis discussion, and the recommendation. Okay, next slide. So as Scott was talking about, this is a long established area where the city has been considering and slowly converting farmland to industrial for many years. And I just wanted to remind you all that the 1998 and the 2016 Save Open and Agricultural Resources was passed, but does not actually apply to this site. So this site was always part of the city's long-term vision established starting in the 80s for an industrial area. The specific plan, as Scott mentioned, was approved in 2012. And there's a little breakdown here, which we can talk about more about what the anticipated uses were for this site, mostly industrial, opportunity for business and research, and then a small amount of office and a small amount of commercial. But the actual specific plan is quite flexible in how these get applied. And then very recently, this week, there was the impact fees were updated, which also applies because the number of the mitigations and conditions related to this project include fees. So those have now been updated, and we'll be looking at 2020 numbers on the fees. Okay, next slide. So there are 4 key components, and I'm gonna go through them sort of in the order that they are in the staff report. So there's a consistency evaluation where the city looked at the original CEQA document from 2012, and we created an evaluation to make sure that this is permitted per the CEQA guidelines, section 15168, that the project is not subject to additional environmental review. The work that was done in 2012 is still applicable. There is an approval of a development agreement between the city and CEQA Farms and AMS Craig LLC. This is a voluntary negotiated agreement between two entities. And then the approval of the subdivision of the tentative map, which will also include the phase 1 public infrastructure improvements that will serve that subdivision. And it's very important that we have the infrastructure in place, which we will with this approval. And then lastly, 5 new roads were created and they have been named per the city's conventions, and we'll be presenting those names tonight. Okay, next slide. The specific plan adopted in 2012. So our actual overview of what we need to do tonight and the next steps are that you'll provide recommendations by the Planning Commission to the City Council for your opinions on approval of the development agreement, the tentative map, and the road naming. The City Council will then make those formal approvals if they choose to. And then as we go forward with the final map, that is a director approval and any design review permits for projects generated on this site. And the director is also able to approve the grading permits and the building permits. Okay, next slide. We have a couple of different terms that are used throughout your 600 plus pages of documentation, and I just want to give some clarity here. So when we talk about the project, we're talking about the development agreement, the tentative map, and the road naming. The tentative map includes the phase 1 improvements. When we just talk about development general, we're talking about buildings that will be constructed in the future on this site, because the tentative map is really lines on a paper. And the buildings themselves will have their own projects coming forward. The vested rights are part of the development agreement, and that gives the right to proceed with development in substantial compliance with ordinances, policies, and the standards approved with this action. Okay, next. So here's just quick location. I think you are probably all very well aware of this area. It's right just south of the 101. It's 430 acres. It's the entire specific plan area. Next slide. Here's a little closer view so you can sort of locate it in terms of the street. It's a highly accessible site, which is one of the, I think, key issues related to the specific plan and circulation and the original intent. It's just south of the 101. It's between 2 major avenues and Boulevard, Rice and Del Norte. It's just north of Latigo, where there's a number of industrial stuff just south of there that's been part of the build out of this general concept since the 80s. And Gonzales Road terminates on the western perimeter of the site, and part of this project will allow that and a new street, Street A, to go through the site and expand the grid between Rice and Del Norte, which is really a critical part of establishing the city's circulation system. Okay, next slide. Just quickly to look at the zoning, the specific plan zoning is business park, business and research park, and light industrial, and all the different sort of nuances of that. General plan use matches that. Okay, next slide. Surrounding uses, I think again you're pretty well aware that north is the 101. And south we have the limited manufacturing. I discussed the sort of moving along of the industrial work that's been going on since the 80s. To the east is still agriculture. And then to the west, we have a number of different mixed uses, but related in terms of business, research park, and some other things. All right, where the city is building out. So one of the really great ideas for the specific plan that impressed me when I first read it is that it talks about these master plan concepts that really divides all the different layers to the specific plan. And I'm going to go through them with you so that when we talk about the project, you can understand how it applies to the specific plan. So one of the key concepts is land use. So it identified business and research, office, industrial, and commercial And those are shown in this slide with the different colors, right? And they're sort of lined up with their, and you'll see that the graphic is sort of driven by the roadways, right? So Gonzales, the continuation of Gonzales is that arch. And the intent was that this was flexible. So these were what the analysis studied as the assumptions, but there's opportunity for them to mix up a little bit. As you can see by the way it shows here that, you know, for instance, that central section that's bordered by Gonzales and the new street A, which is, and the two north-south streets could be a mix of any of these uses. Okay, next slide. So, and then there's the circulation concept. So as I talked about a little before, we're really expanding the grid in the city, and it's an important opportunity to improve circulation by having these streets that go through. So Gonzales will go through the new Street A, which is part of the phase 1 improvement. So that's definitely part of the project that will happen first. And then these two streets that go north and south. Okay. And then an extension, oops, sorry. Can we go back for a second? Oh, it sort of shows here. And then there's the extension of Gonzales to the east of Del Norte, which is also important. Okay, thank you. So then there's the landscape right-of-way. So I think that the specific plan was foresighted in assuming that landscaping is part of the right-of-way and the circulation. And so that not only are we looking at identifying the project entries, which is a requirement, but creating these intersection park zones. So with these important new streets where the bigger black squares are these ideas that we're sort of creating these little park zones that are going to give a certain sense of character as a landscaped element of the city. So even though we are looking at office and industrial and manufacturing, we're also looking at the public experience of this really quite lush and lovely landscaping throughout the site. So there's different kinds of ways that the landscaping has to be applied. The entries to the area, which are the hatched ones, and then the intersection park zones, the key intersections of the new streets, the individual project gateways, and then the frontages of Rice and Del Norte, buffer edge zones, and then all along the street frontages. So it's a fairly intense and well thought out landscaping program. Next. Oh, and there also its intent is to look at walkability. So certainly it'll be beautiful as you're driving through, but there's also going to be a good network of bicycles and sidewalks so that we're looking at a multimodal access. The landscaping intends to not only make it attractive for that walkability and bicycling as well as driving, but also serves as a kind of wayfinding so that you'll be able to identify where you are, partly by the landscaping. And then it preserves vistas because there's really quite extensive setbacks from 30 to 60 feet on the key streets where there are vistas, Rice and Del Norte. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the development agreements. And I will go through that and we can, have questions if these are necessary afterwards. But I'll just go through the main points. Right.
I'm having trouble with your microphone.
Oh, is it better if I'm closer or farther?
Closer.
Closer. Okay.
That's
Is
good.
that better?
Much better.
Okay. All right. Michelle, next slide. So the development agreement is a voluntary contract between a local jurisdiction and a person or entity who owns property in the jurisdiction. It details obligations for both parties. It specifies standards and conditions and provides terms. Some of those terms can be related to financing. In this case, the proposed DA does not modify the physical environment, but just provides the certainties and benefits for the potential development projects that will follow. Next slide. The specific benefits that the city and the developer hope to achieve through the development agreement are the construction of public services and infrastructure. The creation of a community facilities district, which is going to provide funding for additional firefighters, economic opportunity and potential job creation from the development that will follow, and conveyance of groundwater rights to the city, and dedicated land for the future development of the Del Norte 101 interchange and the extension of Gonzales Road. Next slide. There were specific terms under discussion that were negotiated. Staff is recommending that the DA remain in effect for 15 years. The developer has requested an initial term of 20 years. One of the reasons that staff is recommending the 15 years is because while there are other development agreements in the city that provide much more infrastructure than this one, so that the intent is, the thoughts are that 15 years is an appropriate term in relationship to the way we would typically do a development agreement. The key things that are being provided by this are the community facilities district, which will continue for 50 years from the termination or expiration of the DA, as long as there is a specific amount of square footage developed. Okay, moving forward, next slide. The vested right is set out in the DA. The fees, the way the fees can be charged is set out. The opportunity to utilize fees credits that are part of the original Northeast industrial area, and yeah, here we go, and the in lieu credits for water, sewer, etc. Okay. Development impact fees as identified in the DA will be paid with the issuance of the building permits. There is a very well thought out storm water quality control measures as part of this project, and that's covered in part by the DA. There'll be an expedited processing time frame, and the term shall be commensurate with the terms of the DA for any subdivision. So that will match up. Next slide. There's two things that are important to understand. That there's a mitigation measure that was part of the original specific plan that talked about dedicating land for a fire station. And as the city has progressed with their fire response and technology and this, that, and the other, it was determined that this process should actually change that to equivalent mitigation that funds fire personnel to achieve the same improvements for fire services. And so that's reflected both in the DA and in the mitigation measures of the CEQA consistency program document. And the way that that works is through a proper owner use association with a community financing district, which is going on a similar track with the council, but it has its own process. And that will include the funding for the fire protection services, as well as the maintenance and landscaping, drainage facilities, and weed control of in the public right of way. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the tentative map and all the pieces of that. So that's the next part of this. So as you can see, this is our tentative track map. There's 4 lots there now for the 430 acre site, and the track map divided into 129 individual lots of multiple different sizes. Next slide. One of the requirements in the specific plan, one of the key requirements actually for the tentative map and the lot division, is that we meet certain lot area, lot frontage, and lot depth minimum. And the next slide, Michelle, you'll see that on your Exhibit F, which is just part of Exhibit F, we actually did the calculation, and the lots are all meet the requirements except for one, when there's a condition now to address it that will have to be corrected prior to final map. Next slide. So we're talking about specific plan area 5 when we talk about what's going to happen first. So this area is 116 acres, essentially 4 new roads. The drainage facilities are here, and a lot of the landscaping, but not all of it. So next slide. So this is a clearer, when you're overlaid on the actual phase 1 improvements, you'll see the area on the southern portion is the phase 1 improvement. So that's what, when the tentative map is approved and the phase 1 improvements, those are the improvements that will go in to support the immediate first phase of development. So it's not the entire road system. Gonzales Road does not get built at this time, but it is Street A, which is now CEQA Way for the street naming. And then it's portions of the north-south streets that were anticipated with a temporary cul-de-sac ending. Next. So here's this gives you a sense of the full street system. And what will be built out here is all of CEQA Drive, part of Gravity Circle, and part of Synergy Circle. Okay, next slide. And this is the phase 1 landscaping, which is, I think, the easiest way to really look at how it's going to look in the phase 1. Next slide. One of the key things that's happening with the phase 1, which is very important and takes up a fair bit of the conditions, is that the stormwater drainage area for all of the right-of-way will be built as part of phase 1 and the very second part of the site. And it crosses the street. There's more about that on a little bit to the east of Del Norte as well. Next slide. This is showing a little bit of what goes in terms of applying the specific plan. So we're going to be looking at 2 of those intersection nodes. And then we'll be looking at the street frontages and the areas shown here. So some of Rice, some of Del Norte, and most of up to the cul-de-sacs on the north-south streets. We've also been looking at how to, thank you, Michelle. We're also looking at how to update some of the specific plan species that were recommended, and this is taken care of in our conditions, as we recognize that since 2012, the way that we think about water, the way we think about climate change, the way we know what thrives and know what doesn't has changed a little bit. So we're suggesting some substitute species to address that. Next slide. So there are 236 conditions in our in the resolution that specifically address a number of things. One is the construction of the public infrastructure, the landscape installation and maintenance in the public right-of-way, water conservation and quality, stormwater detention, the traffic improvements that will be built as part of phase 1. And we've also included in there the conditions for future projects that will be constructed on the parcels within the specific plan area. So our conditions are not limited just to phase 1, but as each project comes through, it will have its own conditions as well. That will be more specific versions of the general conditions that are included here for development. Next slide. And some of the detailed conditions that staff spent a lot of time on and worked with the CEQA team to really get them right are the stormwater detention basins, are very important. The traffic improvements at key intersections as identified in the mitigation measures. Construction, maintenance, and alternative native and hardier species for landscaping. I talked about that already. And then we were very proud to be able to include at the fiber network master plan fiber optic cable that was approved, I think, at the beginning of May 5th, perhaps. So we were able to bring that into, so there will be optimal fiber optic cable as part of the first phase, the infrastructure and the first phase and going forward. Next slide. So road naming, this was really a wonderful experience for me as someone new to Oxnard, that Oxnard put so much thought into their road naming. And there is a city council resolution that identifies what should happen in in different areas of the city, and this is the Northeast Industrial Area. So they've identified that that resolution identifies historically significant names as one opportunity and scientific terms. And so we had a road naming committee that the development team, the CEQA team submitted terms. The road naming committee reviewed them and went through them in terms of how they might work for emergency dispatch and Spanish, applicable translations in Spanish, and made some changes and some suggestions, and ended up recommending these names: Secioka Drive, Gravity Circle, Synergy Circle, Gonzalez Road will keep its name as it extends across Del Norte, and Biology Place.
Excuse me, Sarah. I think some of the participants have their mics unmuted and it's echoing as you speak. But I think if everyone, with the exception of the speaker, if we mute our mics, we might be able to improve the sound quality. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. The next discussion item is the consistency analysis, the CEQA documents. As we noted earlier, the city improved an environmental impact report in 2012, and that they certified it, and they adopted an adaptive management mitigation monitoring, as well as a statement of overriding considerations for agricultural resources, greenhouse gas emissions, and roadway noise. The EIR included mitigations for air quality, biological resources, culture and tribal cultural resources, geology and soils, hazards and hazardous materials, population and housing, public services, and transportation. And there were less than significant impacts or no impacts at all for aesthetics and urban design, hydrology and water quality, land use and planning, mineral resources and population, education and housing. So next slide, please. So per the CEQA guidelines, section 15168C, we have the opportunity to look at this program EIR that was adopted in 2012 and determine whether or not additional environmental document must be prepared. And the city used the consistency evaluation format that's allowed under the CEQA guidelines to look at that, do any additional work that needed to be done, or verify to determine that everything that was stated in that 2012 EIR is still addressed per the current conditions, that they haven't changed significantly. And the city chose to do that, and it's part of your packet. And our evaluation substantiates and supports the determination that the project's environmental impacts are within the scope of the specific planning EIR. It hasn't changed significantly, and we don't require the subsequent EIR or negative declaration. Next slide. So the TDM and the phase 1 site are covered and within the scope of the specific planning EIR. And it adequately describes the project for purposes of CEQA. The scope was anticipated in the specific plan, and further environmental documentation is not required. As mitigated, there's no new significant impact. And the document still stands with the topics adopted by the city in 2017. So no new mitigations are required to address these topics. And those include aesthetics, air quality, climate change, geology and soils, hazard criteria, noise criteria, transportation, and wildfire criteria. So many of those were anticipated in the work that was done in 2012. Next slide. There's two areas where the city has made significant progress in terms of their sustainability and their policy, where we've taken the existing mitigations and replaced them with adaptive mitigations that have equal or better overall focus in terms of what the impacts would be. And one is the fire personnel, which I discussed earlier. It's part of the DA, but it's also here in the mitigation measures, so that instead of dedicating land, the DA covers funding for 3 firefighters for their personnel, their pay, and also with some increment of increase in benefits.
And that's into perpetuity.
Yes, in perpetuity.
I think it's very important to emphasize.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the other part is about recycled water and the way the city has progressed in terms of the way they look at groundwater recovery and enhancement. So the city now has their GREAT program, which is broader than what was originally anticipated in 2012, which required a lot of recycled water pipe. So next slide, please. The way that we've adapted those mitigations is to allow them to better align with the GREAT program, which has more opportunities for addressing water usage with water rights, which is the city water, and participating in the replenishment of the aquifer. Next slide. Okay, well, we're it's almost the end. I'll just remind everyone of the recommendation, which is on the next slide. So we're looking at 3 particular, I believe these are motions, can correct me, where you're finding that the project is not subject to additional environmental, that you're essentially confirming the consistency evaluation. You're adopting a resolution recommending that the City Council approve planning and zoning permits for the development agreement, the tentative map, and the final road demand. So we're essentially, that's also planning a zoning permit or subject to certain findings and conditions. So I'm sure that will walk you through the actions. But I'm done. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I am so glad to have seen this presentation because it answered a lot of the questions that I had after reading every single page in this packet. So I really appreciate that, especially the distinction between project and development. I think that's good to explain to those of us who aren't in your field. So thank you very much. Commissioners, Vice Chair Sanchez, any questions of Ms. Lejeune?
Madam Chair, this is Mr. Dozier. I just have a question on one of the slides. First, I want to say thank you, sir, for excellent presentation. This was like reading through a novel. I didn't get through all. I had to skip some of it. It's really a lot of work and a lot of effort, and I can see, I can only imagine how much work it took you just to put this presentation together. My question was, you kind of addressed it. It started out on when you were on slide 21, and you were referring, talking about the included fire protection services. Later on slide 39, you kind of answered the question by saying that instead of dedicating land to a fire station or something like that, that they would cover the cost of 3 firefighters. My question is, which current fire station services would service this part of town?
Chair,
That,
Chair Frank, we are joined today by Fire Chief Darwin Bass, so we're going to have him come to the microphone to answer that question for everyone.
That would be great. Thank you.
Right. Well, good evening. So fire station number 5 in Colonial, 1450 Colonial Road would cover that location. It's approximately 2.5 miles away. And so the reason why we're making this option of increasing the staffing as opposed to constructing a new fire station within the CEQA project is we'll still meet the response times based on road speed plus 10 miles an hour for responses.
And will servicing this new area, will that require more resources to be allocated to the fire station that will be servicing it? Meaning, will you guys need an additional fire truck or additional personal gear or such?
Well, the safety gear, yes. Equipment, no. It'll be covered with the existing engines and equipment that we have there.
And you said the response time is fine. Is there a percentage or a table that I mean, because you're increasing, you're probably doubling the area that you're going to provide fire protection, but you're only increasing your staff by 3.
That's true.
How's that work out?
Well, national standards recommend a fire station every 1.5 miles. We don't even meet that criteria right now. So we have to take a look at things that will benefit us when it comes to response times. That's traffic signal devices allow us to have green lights going forward as opposed to having to deal with the traffic and making our way to an incident. One thing that we're also looking at within this project is just the advanced construction and fire protection safety features built, meeting our criteria. So I'm comfortable with, as opposed to a fire station, essentially adding an additional personnel to an existing fire station. And what we're essentially doing there is we're meeting the spirit of the law that Cal OSHA put out for us. If I had only 3 firefighters there and we're responding to a structure fire, we're unable to go interior to initiate fire attack. With 4 firefighters on an engine, then we meet that criteria of what's called 2 in and 2 out. 2 individuals are able to go in, initiate fire attack. 2 people stay on the exterior to facilitate a rescue if necessary.
Okay. And my final question is, was this change or is this change coordinated with first responders, like the need for ambulances and services and the police service and things like that?
I can't speak for law enforcement. The ambulance companies, though, we work collaterally on this, and they don't have as many ambulances within the city, and they're not stationed like we are strategically throughout for response times. So I can't speak to that either.
Okay. Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Sarah, again, for excellent presentation.
Thank you, commissioners. Mr. Meyer?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, since we've still got you available, let's see.
I'm here.
Gosh, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can get back to that question. I'm sorry, Steve. Chief, I'll get back to you. I've got a few other questions while I see if that'll ruminate back. So question for Sarah. Thank you again for the presentation. And one question I had is, with the plan being approved 8 years ago, and things changing somewhat in terms of the vision for transportation going forward, in terms of the kinds of cars we'll see and ride sharing and that sort of thing going forward. Is that incorporated into the plan? Is there space for that to be incorporated in terms of perhaps we might have a different view of parking spaces or other factors that would accommodate the way we will be transporting as the development unfolds?
I can begin this question and answer the question, and I think Scott may have more to add, but I think each individual project will have more, I mean, that's where we'll be looking at parking spaces and so forth, but because this sets up the circulation plan, it was foresighted with its focus on bike lanes and walkability and sidewalks, and I think the landscaping supports that.
Yeah. excuse me for interrupting the question, but it's my understanding that each project that's to be put on a lot or a multitude of lots will be evaluated in its own right with respect to parking and building structure and all of that business.
Okay. So it's preliminary at this point to even have to consider those things. We have enough flexibility to accommodate.
Commissioner Meyer, that's accurate. This is Scott Kolwitz chiming in here. We also wanted to point out that the specific plan requires a transportation demand management program for other developments that are going to be coming on board. So on a project-by-project basis, we really do get to look at how this is operating in the greater scheme as well as in the micro project level.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Scott. A broad question, given that I haven't before been part of the growth of a project from this stage forward, is there, for example, for phase one to commence, is there a certain number of development agreements? You know, we have the large agreement, but there's a certain number of agreements within that agreement, within the plan, that get affected before development rolls out. For example, before we start building out roads and some of the initial infrastructure.
Commissioner Meyer, the quick answer to that is no. A development agreement is not needed whatsoever. It's a voluntary agreement that the city and the developer have with one another. Essentially, the city and the developer thought that there might be mutual benefit by entering into this larger development agreement. The city, what we're looking for is net public benefit, if you will, from what we could otherwise normally get on a development, and the developer is looking for some level of certainty in terms of usually fees and timing are the two big things that are in development agreements for developers, but they're not required. It really is a voluntary thing. What is needed for this project is the tentative map to be processed in accordance with the specific plan, and then a final map is recorded afterwards, which really looks at the hard and detailed engineering. And the requirement for that is the final map needs to be substantially consistent with the tentative map. Sometimes there's little tweaks as we discover things with the construction drawings, if you will. And then there's subsequent development design review permits that are in the director's authority for the actual buildings that are going to come onto play. Those are really the only three entitlements at the high level that are needed for this project as a whole and the individual ones coming forward. And then after you clear through the planning process, ultimately it's individual grading and or building permits would be pulled to implement the project.
And this is Jeff Lambert, Commissioner Meyer. I would only add to that the applicant is actually participating tonight, and they have a brief presentation to make too, and that might be a question for them as the subdivider of the land, what their plan is for actually implementing this plan with physical development on the ground based on any discussions they're having with ultimate builders and projects.
Yeah, but we're not at that place yet. We're just here for phase one and the map and the names, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that gives me some idea. Yeah, I'll await that following presentation. Is this a point where it's where I can ask questions about some of the details within what we've read in the staff report?
Yes, this is your opportunity to question that.
Great. Okay, so I had one question, Mr. Lambert, that I shared with you over the phone or texting, just in regard to the plans for developers having the option to include solar on their property. And it read that it would be available for development of 10,000 square feet or more with flat or nearly flat roofs. And I guess I was looking for more clarification because as I understood it, a roof up to 30 degrees of slope is functionally acceptable and efficient for solar production. Can you speak to that, or can someone speak to that who's here?
Commissioner Meyer, we're going to have Jeff Pengelly, our Assistant Community Development Director, speak to the issue of solar panels.
Yes, hi, Commissioner Meyer. The bulk of the buildings out here, if not all of them, are anticipated to have substantially flat roofs as industrial buildings. And so I don't think the pitch of the roof would ever affect your ability to install solar panels, if that answers your question.
So the language there is not language that should exclude any significant development from being able to consider solar.
That's correct. And I think it's to their advantage to construct substantially flat roofs for efficiencies of construction of industrial buildings. And as you pointed out, even a significant slope of up to 30 degrees can still accommodate solar, but they'll have substantial flat areas with each building.
Great. One last question was regarding palm trees in the plan, in the staff report that I read. Is there possibility for less or even no palm trees and more functional shade trees in their place? Perhaps more native or otherwise appropriate trees for our region?
Commissioner Meyer, this is Scott Kolwitz chiming in here again. We have our landscape architect who consulted with us on this project, Brian Broderson, on the phone. So I'm going to ask him to speak to that in just a moment. But to frame it, the specific plan has a lot of landscaping discussions in there about what is anticipated. And the call out for the palm trees is really about gateway sort of markers, if you will. So it's not anticipated that the palm trees are going to be the dominant species out there, but at key intersections to identify this is a place of interest, if you will. Members of the public look here to enter this development. So with that, let me pivot for a second and ask Brian Broderson, who was on earlier. I actually don't see his name.
I'm here.
Oh, thank you.
So thanks, Scott. So that's a difficult question because we're working within the confines of a specific plan. And if it is, I think it is the city's discretion to revisit that specific plan at this time. There were the copious amount of palm trees on some of the original plans that I saw, and we asked them to reduce the number of palms. And the palms are primarily being used as wayfinding devices at the corners. They were part of a definite overall concept, and that could be accomplished in a different way, but we would have to revisit it and sort of reformulate a bit the specific plan. I do think it can be effective. It really is something that requires an overall city vision and direction for it. We are a coastal community, and palm trees do say something that some other communities can't say, which is kind of an interesting thing. There's a lot of controversy right now about palm trees and whether they make sense or not. I find them to be relatively, they're reasonable as far as water use. They don't provide as much shade, but when used in a grouping as they're proposed for this project and used at a corner, I don't think shading is a tremendous issue. I don't know if that, hopefully that helps a little bit. It's sort of, I guess, up to you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, it may be more understanding that they have perhaps more of a visual and ornamental perspective and purpose rather than a functional purpose, say in one of the small park-like nodes where people might actually appreciate functional trees that would provide some more shade.
I didn't notice in the specific plan that I noticed that there's multimodal opportunities for bikes and walking and that sort of thing. as far as places to gather or stop, I don't really see those in this particular plan. I think those situations would occur on the individual development sites, and the development sites we can very strongly make sure that the palm trees are not used there specifically, so that they do show up as wayfinding devices. And then I think on one of the roads they're scattered around a bit.
Excuse me for interrupting you, but the PowerPoint presentation that we just saw talked about these individual little park areas as gathering spaces at the street intersections. And I think that's what Commissioner Meyer is referring to.
Correct.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, and well, in the PowerPoint, she also referenced the fact that the landscaping choices were being reevaluated as we speak to include more native plants and trees and things like that. So while there wasn't a discussion right on point, palm trees versus other trees, it was my understanding from the PowerPoint presentation that all the choices were being reevaluated.
Yes, I'm the one who's been doing that work. As far as the occupation of those intersections, there's some additional paving, the actual improvements there. We haven't seen any of those yet. So it's a little bit of a blind spot for me. I apologize.
Mr. Meyer.
Understood. Thank you. Let's see. I believe that may be my only other question. Unfortunately, I don't remember my question to our fire chief.
We can come back.
Thank you.
You'll only get one shot here.
Now,
You can ask all the questions you want. Okay?
thank you kindly.
Commissioner Chavez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. A couple of questions in regards to the housing inventory. Do we know how much is this going to impact our numbers that we report to the state?
There's no housing involved in this plan.
Commissioner Chavez, so we have our housing numbers from the state that's been confirmed for our next cycle of 8,500 units to build over the next, from 2021 through 2029. So this project won't impact that. Those numbers, though, when they're created for the next cycle, they do look at commercial development that drives housing development. So there will likely be an impact in the long term, but that's really part of the city's goal, is to grow jobs in industrial development and then also try to create the housing to serve those projects.
I appreciate that. One of the concerns that I have is the impact to our utilities, and particularly the water, wastewater, the infrastructure that's going over there. The significant impacts to the wastewater facility, because we are aware that the wastewater facility is an older facility, dates back to the 1950s in some parts. So what is going to be the impact for this particular project moving forward?
Commissioner Chavez, that's a great question. We have looked at the infrastructure for this development, and broadly speaking, the necessary improvements are folded into this project through the mitigation measures of the environmental impact report, as well as through the project conditions in the map. But we are also joined by Tatiana Arnaud, and I'm going to ask Tatiana to speak to infrastructure concerns and to offer that perspective to all of us.
Yes, hi, Commissioner Chavez. This is Tatiana Arnaud, city engineer. So this development was anticipated as part of our master planning efforts for our utility infrastructure. So we are definitely prepared to take on this new development with the infrastructure that we have in existence today. So we don't anticipate any issues coming about from the development of these parcels.
Now, let me ask, it was mentioned during the PowerPoint presentation to try to connect to the GREAT program. as far as connecting that site to the GRAPE program, is that an option, or what's the cost involved with that?
So in terms of actually making a connection to the GRAPE program, at this time, we unfortunately don't have any sort of recycled water lines that can connect all the way up to that development. But we are looking for some sort of mitigation measures, again, through, I believe what Scott just mentioned, the environmental aspect of, you know, we're looking at whether or not they pay into some upgrades to our GRAPE program and that infrastructure that goes along with it, so that there would still be a benefit to the entire city, but this exact development won't necessarily have that direct connection.
Okay. And I guess if our fire chief is still there, just a quick question in regards to the fire response.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chief. Quick question. How many calls is Station 5 handling a day under its current situation?
That I'd have to get back to you. I could do really quick research, and before the end of this meeting, I'll have that answer for you.
Okay. Okay. And I guess just the main concern was, and I think I shared with Commissioner Dozier, was ensuring that, you know, we meet certain standards for public safety. But we're still part of that agreement with the county that they'll respond to calls if they have a closer engine, correct?
That's correct. Some time ago, we eliminated our jurisdictional boundaries for emergency responses, so it is closest resources. Ventura County, Ventura City, the local military bases, we all respond if we happen to be in that vicinity.
Now, is there any other station, whether it's Oxnard or the county, that's nearby this particular project?
Next closest station is 4 off of Vineyard, and then the south station off of Rose, that's Station 8. And I believe that one is 2.8 to 3 miles from the location, the proposed location.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Vice Chair Sanchez? Vice Chair, are you here? All right, Commissioner Fearing.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Couple questions. We talked about in the presentation the development agreement that the city of Oxnard wants it to be for 15 years and the applicant wants it for 20 years. Can you explain why we want it for 15 and the applicant wants it for 20?
Yes, I'm happy to address that issue. The 2 development agreements in place right now that are for 20-year period.
Is this Mr. Roselle speaking? Who is this speaking?
Yes, this is Ken Roselle, Chief Assistant City Attorney.
Thank you.
Right now, the city has 2 20-year development agreements. One is with River Park, one is with the Wagon Wheel. From staff's perspective, these are very different projects than the project before you tonight. For both Wagon Wheel and River Park, they're required to build substantial infrastructure. Wagon Wheel and River Park have substantial parks. River Park constructed multiple schools at their cost. Wagon Wheel is constructing flood walls along the river. Both those developments have trails. River Park had to build a fire station, and River Park also built an interchange, and both Wagon Wheel and River Park built off-ramps. So based on the difference in the level of improvements being constructed, we believe that 15 years is a generous term to provide, and 20 years is not consistent with what this project would be building as far as public benefits.
Okay, thank you. Another question. It says that the development agency is going to provide for permanent salary funding for the firefighters. What about any rate increases that the firefighters would be getting and potential improvements to the equipment over that period of time, over that period of 15 years?
Yes, happy to address that. The development agreement includes language indicating that the CFD, which is the Community Facilities District, has to remain in place for 50 years after the DA is terminated. So at a 15-year term, assuming it ends then, you add another 50 years to that. And the CFD right now, which is going through the formation process, the City Council will have a public hearing on June 16th. It indicates that $300,000 a year will go toward paying the cost of the 3 firefighters. That CFD then has a CPI amount. So during the entire term of the CFD, every year the assessments will go up. So we believe that will appropriately cover the cost of the 3 firefighters. So this should appropriately mitigate the impacts of this project.
Okay. Thank you. A question about the street names. The 3 of them, Synergy, Gravity, and Biology, are they indicative of the kind of businesses you're looking to go there? Or I guess what was the process for coming up with those 3 names?
Commissioner Fearing, this is Scott Kolwitz. I'll answer that first and foremost. The street naming protocols that we have at the city have identified this area as a science area. So it was looking for us to use scientific terms to name all of the streets. It's not indicative of the types of businesses. We can't control for that in terms of brand names or business names or those sort of things. As a land use matter, we do control for the types of uses, so industrial, office, research park, those type of uses, but we don't control the actual businesses that are going to locate on any given street. If it happens that we have a biotech company that locates on Biology Circle, great, but that's not a requirement.
Thank you. That's all the questions I had.
Thank you very much. Do we have Vice Chair Sanchez with us? I guess not. Any other commissioner? Any follow-up, Commissioner Meyer?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chief, I did have one question. From what you were discussing in terms of having stoplights and that speeding up the ability to respond, I just wanted to get some clarification there, because as I typically understood it, what the fire engines were able to do were basically to signal cars through horns and sirens to get out of the way and let them know that we're coming through regardless of the condition of the light as being red or green. Were you suggesting that the fire forces can actually have some control over the stoplights? I just wasn't sure if that's what you were suggesting.
That is correct. We have something that's called Opticom, which basically it's there's 2 different ones. One's a proximity to the intersection. It will signal the lights to turn green to allow us to move forward. There's also another one that we're going down is based on our distances. It just follows us electronically. It kind of places us how far away we are from an intersection, and it starts that transition from the light going from red to green for us to move through.
Oh, fantastic. I learned something entirely new.
Right, and then going back to the number of calls, I went back yesterday. That station had 4 calls. The day before it had 5. 3 days ago it had 9. So, and if you want me to take it further back, I can look into that as well as how many calls that station averages.
That's fine, Chief. I appreciate you looking into that. Thank you.
No problem.
One more question, Madam Chair. In regard to what Commissioner Chavez had mentioned, I did notice that the potential for residential development was mentioned a few times in the plan. And I didn't understand exactly how that might fit in. It seemed like it was something in relation to how the developments might go and part of the flex. Can someone elaborate on that?
Commissioner Meyer, this is Scott Kolwitz, and I'll elaborate on that. The original specific plan had identified residential as potentially being something allowed out there, but it didn't make it through to the final specific plan. The environmental analysis does include some language about residential development. So if one goes back to the original EIR and or to the currently adopted mitigation measures, there is references to residential development. As we took the mitigation measures and carried them forward, you also might have seen some references in the conditions of approval on the map. But taking a giant step back, there's really just 4 different land uses that are allowed out here. The residential, sorry, not the residential, the industrial, the commercial, the office, and I'm blanking on the last one for a second.
Research.
Thank you. And then there's some references in the documents to a 5th land use, and what that really is referring to is a mixed use, if you will. As you might recall in the presentation, we had some color blocking showing where the different uses were allowed. Some of those overlap. So on those locations, it would be the mixed use land use.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, commissioners. I have a couple of questions about the adaptive management mitigation program, particularly the phase 1 site improvement impacts on page 164 of the packet. It says that the project developer shall pay applicable city and county traffic impact fees in an amount to be agreed on by the city and the developer toward implementing improvements at various locations in the city that would appear to have some kind of be impacted by this development. So my question is, and there's 1, 2, 3, looks like 5 of them at different locations, 6 of them, 7, I'm sorry. And so are these fees supposed to be paid as soon as phase 1 starts?
Chair Frank, this is Ken Roselle. The specific plan and the environmental conditions relating to it allows the developer to pay fees versus actually constructing the offsite improvements. So there's a number of intersections which are identified as being potentially affected by this development, but the payment of fees is deemed under the environmental impact report to address those particular environmental issues caused by this development. And that language is also reflected in the development agreement that those conditions apply.
Right, I saw that. My question is, what assurance do we have that, for example, MMI1, Rose Avenue and Gonzales, that there are fees going to be paid toward implementing improvements to the Rose Avenue and Gonzales Road intersection, adding a 4th westbound through lane, which will mitigate both project and cumulative 2010 no project impacts. And, you know, all of them are pretty much the same with traffic flow modification and signalization. So I'm just wondering, are those funds devoted to that spot, or is it they're just going into a public works central fund, or are they dedicated to these improvements as outlined in the report?
The fees are not specifically dedicated for each of these intersections. When development sticks in the ground go forward, they will be paying multi-million dollars amount of fees, so that those fees will go into the city's traffic funds, and they will be programmed under the CIP, which is Capital Improvement Program. So as the need rises, those improvements will be programmed and then constructed.
Because we just did the capital improvement plan, and I don't recall seeing any of this stuff.
Right. Well, at that point in time, because this project had not been entitled, there was not the need to program them. Now that we are, fortunately, after 8 years after the specific plan was approved, we're moving forward, then we can start to program these and ensure that these impacts are addressed as the fees come in.
Okay, so they're not going to the bottom of the pile.
That is correct, absolutely.
Okay, okay, that's all I have. Thank you so much. Really good presentation. All right, any other questions?
Madam Chair, I just had one follow-on question I wanted to ask the fire chief or staff. And my question is, you mentioned, or staff mentioned, that the fire, the new 3 fire fighters would be paid for through a CDF fund. I wanted to know if that CDF fund, is that going to be funded by the developer, or is it funded via property tax?
This is Ken Roselle. I'm happy to address that issue. As the CFD is formed, it's going to be based upon a per acre cost. So once the first building permit is pulled, and we don't know when that's going to happen specifically, but once that starts, it triggers the requirement to make the payments that equal $300,000 a year. So that money can then go to fund 3 firefighters at Station 5. So we anticipate that funding would come to the fire department within 12 to 18 months after the first building permits are pulled. And so the fire station would then be up to speed by the time, not the fire station, I'm sorry, the new firefighters would be available at that station by the time that development is completed within the specific plan area.
Understood, but my question is, who's funding that CFD?
It is paid it is paid on a per acre basis, so whoever owns each acre of property within the specific plan area, which is about 430 acres, would pay a per acre cost. The CFD, as proposed to be formed, is a little different than others, which often based on actually built buildings. The CEQAs made the decision to have it based on a per acre charge. So once the first building permits are pulled for the first building, then the obligation to pay that starts, and then every owner within the specific plan area pays a per acre charge, and so that would then be paid on their property taxes. It would be an assessment, a CFD assessment, based on that per acre charge. So if they owned 100 acres, they'd be paying taxes based on that 100 acres.
Okay, and is the will this be a Melrose neighborhood?
I mean, it's a community facilities district, which is a Melrose. Yes, it is not a landscape maintenance district.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I just want to make sure that, you know, property or homeowners who buy into this community are aware of Melrose coming and how their CFDs are funded. That's a big issue where I live, so that's why I was asking that question.
No, I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
So we fully understand that. That is clearly indicated in the language of the development agreement. Also, it is a requirement that there be disclosure of this, and it clearly will be disclosed as this project is going forward.
Okay. And my other question was, let's shift gears a little, and this was just about a follow-on kind of to the palm trees and the earlier conversation we had about the landscaping. And I just wanted to just add in that also out here, I live in River Park. We had situations where once the development was turned over to the city, as the city started taking over responsibility of streets and so forth, they found a lot of species of trees were not induced to keeping in this area. So we basically, they had to pull up a lot of trees because they just didn't, I don't know if it was the developer or the city who dropped the ball, but we ended up with a lot of trees that the city couldn't maintain. So I just want us to make sure that as we go forward with this development, that we really keep that in mind. And thank you again for the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
And Chair Frank, this is Scott Kolwitz. I do want to let you know that Vice Chair Sanchez has been on the meeting with us.
I am aware.
Okay. And he's contacted me saying that he has some technical trouble trying to speak, but would like to try to do so again.
I understand that. Thank you. Vice Chair Sanchez. Is there a number he can call in on a telephone?
That's what he attempted to do. Vice Chair Sanchez, if you could hear us right now, if you could press *6, that should unmute your phone if it currently is muted.
Can someone call him?
Yeah, we can't call him. It has to be him calling in to us. So we'll continue to try to work with him in terms of getting his voice on this video feed.
Okay, sounds great. So thank you very much for that portion of the presentation. I understand the applicant is there with the presentation. Are we ready to proceed with an applicant's presentation?
Yes, we are.
Thank you.
And we should be joined by Scott Yules, who is speaking on behalf of the CEQA family.
Nice. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Scott Yules. I'm with Delane Engineering, civil engineer for the Tentative Track Map. I'm presenting on behalf of the owner and developers for the CEQA Farms Business Park Tentative Track Map. I'll wait just a minute. It looks like they're pulling the presentation up.
Right. Thank you.
Great, thank you. If you can go to the next slide. So as you can imagine, a project of this size, we have a large team. So I wanted to take just a moment and introduce us, starting with the CEQA Farms Rice Avenue ownership group of CEQA Farms and AMS Craig LLC, Ross Wershing Wolcott, our project attorney, Delane Engineering, who I'm with, civil engineers, LLG is our traffic engineers, Wheeland Design Group is our landscape architect, Gray Electrical for dry utility consultants, GPA for environmental, Q3 is our drainage consultants, Earth Systems, our geotechnical engineers, and finally Benner Carpenter for our survey and mapping. And this is our team that has put together the tentative map and all of the studies and reports that go along with that, and have been reviewing that with staff. If we can go to the next slide. So Scott and Sarah gave a great presentation on all of the technical and details about the project, and I wanted to give just a little bit of history about the project for some context. In 1969, Xerox annexed the property into the city with the intention of building a Western headquarters here. That didn't pan out, and in 1974, the CEQA family purchased the property from Xerox and started farming. 1986, they agreed to participate in the Northeast Industrial Assessment District with the city, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. 1997, CEQA shut down its farming operation and began leasing out all of its land for local farmers. And then in 2003, we started working on the specific plan. And in 2012, the specific plan was adopted. And the picture to the right, that's an old label from the CEQA Farms, and that's actually Roy CEQA. Jimmy CEQA's dad is the kid in the picture there. Next slide, please.
I love that.
As you saw, we've been working on this since 2003. So 17 years, we're finally getting to this point. And I just wanted to let you know quickly where we're going. within the next year, we are planning on seeing actual real developments in the ground and on site. And so it's taken 17 years to get here, but within the next year, we're looking at having real projects and starting mass grading in August, utility infrastructure going in through the winter, and streets and landscaping going in the beginning of next year, and then having real projects shortly after that. Next slide. So benefits to the city, and we'll come back to this at the end of the presentation with a quick discussion about the development agreement length. But the development is going to be providing city benefits, both long-term and short-term. Short-term in terms of development fees, with 8.5 million square feet of commercial, research, and industrial buildings, we're estimating at over $60 million in development fees. And that's in addition to some other fees that have already been paid. We have the NIAD contribution, and that's that Northeast Industrial Assessment District of over 17 million, and then the Rice 101 interchange contribution of over 6 million that has already happened. There's also significant ongoing indirect benefits in terms of revenue and in terms of other city benefits, such as quality jobs, relocation and redevelopment of existing facilities within the city that may have an industrial use, but really aren't situated in a location within the city that is best for that use. And so that use has the ability to move here, stay within the city, and then allow their previous facilities to be redeveloped into something that best fits that area. We're also going to be bringing in new employment centers to the city with this project, and then also significant infrastructure upgrades throughout the city, as was noted earlier in the EIR. It talks about several intersections, and payment of traffic fees will be supporting those improvements. And then we're also looking at approximately 10,000 jobs will be generated and created in this area. That's a little bit hard to quantify, but given the projects that we will be looking at, we would be estimating somewhere around that number. Next slide, please. Some of the other infrastructure benefits. This is along Rice Avenue. Currently, there's 2 lanes that travel north towards the freeway. We'll be providing a 3rd lane throughout the entire area, and then a 4th lane at the intersections. And maybe more important than that, there's going to be 68 feet of landscaping. That's what's depicted on the section to the right. You can see there's parkway, sidewalk, and then a significant amount of landscaping that will be along the entire frontage of the property. And if we can go to the next slide, please. The next slide is Del Norte. I'm sorry, this one's Rice. This is actually Del Norte Boulevard. And on this side, in addition to the existing landscaped median, we'll be providing 38 feet on either side of Del Norte with landscaping and sidewalks in both directions. And hopefully not too many palm trees. If we can go to the next slide. So in terms of the business park features within the project, one key feature, and it's highlighted with the oval to the right, is the Gonzales extension. And we will be building the Gonzales Road extension to the eastern boundary of our project, with the intent of that connecting all the way into Camarillo in the future. The red circles indicate the areas of enhanced landscaping, and those were talked about in the staff report that Sarah gave at key intersections, and also with some project gateways that will be provided for the project. In addition to that, throughout the project, we have extensive landscaping along all of the streetscapes, and we are also providing bike lanes on all of our internal public streets as well for circulation. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that's difficult with a tentative map is we're not presenting any projects to you today, and so it's difficult sometimes to get a feel of what it's going to look like and what's going to be out here. So we wanted to put up just one comparable project of what could be contemplated for a light industrial or business research use. And this is an example of a project that's actually up in Thousand Oaks, where there's an office use in the front that you can see in the upper picture, and in the lower picture you see loading dock and warehouse that's in the back of the building. And this would be something that would be potentially similar to a project or projects that we would get in this area. And next slide. So the one thing that we wanted to come back to was the terms of the development agreement. I know there was discussion that the development agreement for the CEQA Farms Business Park, staff recommended to be 15 years instead of 20 due to the infrastructure provided. However, we believe that with the infrastructure that we are providing with street upgrades and intersection upgrades, as well as the 17 million already contributed to the Northeast Industrial Assessment District, as well as the contributions that we made to the Rice 101 interchange of $6 million. And then given just where we're at in the world with COVID now, and with the uncertainty of the development world, and the fact that we are working to build out 8.5 million square feet of industrial, we do believe that that 20 years gives a better term and a better ability to fully realize the build out of this specific plan instead of the 15 years. And then one other side benefit, I guess, is that the CFD is 50 years after the expiration of the development agreement. So extending that development agreement, that additional 5 years, in addition to allowing us to fully realize the build out of the specific plan, it will add 5 more years on for funding of the CFD for the additional firefighters. So that concludes our presentation for you, and happy to answer questions. I'm also have Craig Kahara, the owner, and Cindy Walcott, our attorney, if there's specific questions that they need to answer.
Very good. Thank you so much. I do have a question on what you just said. The development agreement does provide for mutual consent to contract extension. Am I right? I mean, you can have an additional 15-year term, and if the parties agree, it can be extended by mutual consent. That's my understanding of your agreement.
This is Ken Roselle. That is correct. In fact, if you look at section 2 of the development agreement, staff is proposing 15 years. The CEQAs are proposing 20 years, but already written into it is that the city manager has the ability to extend the agreement for up to additional 10 years without having to go back through a substantial process. So right now it's 15 plus 10 years as proposed by staff. CEQA would be 20 plus 10, so up to 30 years. So we believe that, staff believes that it's already built in for a substantial term to allow the development of this project.
Right, I saw that, and the Community Facilities District does go for 50 years from the termination, whether it's 15 years, 25 years, or 30 years. So, okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Commissioners, do we have Vice Chair Sanchez with us yet? Not yet. Okay, commissioners, any questions of the applicant? I can't hear anybody. Commissioner Dozier, any questions?
Madam Chair, no, I have no questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Meyer.
Just mulling over, I might have had a question.
Want to come back?
Just a few, just come back to me. Thank you.
Commissioner Chavez.
No, Madam Chair. Questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Fearing.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that there were going to be like up to 10,000 jobs created. Is that for construction, or is that construction and if everything's fully built out, what you think the amount of employment will be there?
That's what we're anticipating at full build out. We're not contemplating the construction jobs as part of that. However, there will be a significant number of construction jobs over the next 15 to 20 years for the purpose of building out the buildings, as well as construction of all the infrastructure as well.
Great, thank you. No other questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Fearing. In that regard, is there I didn't see in the staff report, is there a commitment to using local labor?
The short answer, this is Ken Roselle. The short answer is no.
Thank you. Okay, commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner Meyer? Mike Pope, go on.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A question regarding bicycle lane. I know that there's reference to bicycle lanes within the specific plan and within the area. I did notice on the examples, for example, on Rice, I saw the separated sidewalk, but there was no bicycle lane shown there. Are there plans for bicycle lanes along those major corridors, or is that only more within the specific plan area itself?
Sure. So we were currently proposing bike lanes within the specific plan area, all of the streets, as well as Gonzales, which would be the main east-west connector from the project to other parts of the city, but not currently on Rice and Del Norte.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see anybody else with any questions, so thank you very much, applicant. It was very good of you to join us.
Thank you.
Moving on now to public comment. Do I have any public comment?
Chair Frank, we do have one. This is Michelle. I will attempt to get Tom Cady on the line.
Yes, good. Mr. Cady?
Give me just one moment. I'm going to call him now.
Okay, I understand.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Mr. Cady. You'll have 3 minutes for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, this is Tom Cady, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. I am the chair of the Business Advocacy Committee and on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, and we want to speak in favor of the project. This has been a long time coming, and I know many of you have been around long enough to know that this has been an important element to a main corridor to our city and provides opportunities for jobs and economic development, particularly in some of the facts that were brought up as far as commercial manufacturing. I think one area that was not brought up is an opportunity to tie into activity at the port. And now that we're rerouting Highway 1 up Rice, it provides an opportunity for us to tie in that activity. So the Chamber is very much in support of this. And if the Commission could really second that effort to speed the process, because the time is money, and the quicker we can get this project moving, also gives us the opportunity for the economic development associated with the construction of infrastructure. We obviously at this point can use any jobs in our area as possible, and just beginning even the landscaping and stuff is one more job, one more family that has an income. So thank you very much for listening, and we hope that the Commission is able to pass this along with the positive recommendation. Thank Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Sension, anyone else?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I'll close public comment. Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
Madam Chair, if I may speak.
Sure.
I would like some more clarification on the 15-year term and what might be the concerns and what are the pluses and minuses, if there are any, for the city in terms of the 15. From what I'm gathering or what I'm kind of postulating about it all would be that 15-year versus 20 would provide perhaps greater urgency in getting projects moved forward and completed. Is it a matter of by the 15 years that a certain percentage of projects would be in place, or is it that the developer has 15 years upon approval to complete all phases, or they risk not having the development agreement continued forward?
Commissioner Meyer, this is Jeff Lambert. I think the city attorney also tried to provide some basis for that timing, trying to compare it to other development agreements. I will say, I think you hit it on the head that one of the other factors was trying to develop a sense of urgency and to really see this project develop. And so city staff's perspective was 15 years was better because we could see progress. And as the chair mentioned, there is a provision for further extension that the city manager has the authority to do if we see good progress and there's an effort to do a further extension, we could. But that's really the basis of staff's perspective. It is the commission's prerogative to make a recommendation to council. So you could weigh in on this issue as part of your motion to council if you so desired.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. So is the expectation that within 15 years, all proposed development should be completed? Or is it, or please.
Sure.
Sure.
I forgot your second part of your question. I apologize. So yeah, I mean, that's the idea is you have a time frame. The goal is to have it built out in that time frame. But as you mentioned yourself, if for some reason it's not completed and the city doesn't extend it beyond the 15 years, then the benefits of the development agreement would go away. They would expire. And so that's why the term is usually an important factor for both the city and the developer to reach agreement on.
And you provide for the option of extension.
Correct.
And the lost benefits after the 15-year agreement, if it weren't extended, would those be both lost benefits to the city and the developer, or would that be only lost benefits to the developer?
This is Ken Rosell again. The benefits of the development agreement at that stage of the process more benefits the developer. Because they have their vested rights. They're also ensured that no new fees are imposed. There's not a fee lock at that point in time, but the city could not impose new fees. The other benefit is that tentative maps and other permits remain in place during the life of the development agreement. So that also is an encouragement for the developer to move forward with filing final maps and moving forward with the development, which is to the benefit of the city as well.
Thank you, Mr. Rosell. One last question would be, do we have any idea of the development pipeline that the developer has moving forward? It sounded like they were expecting, after they laid the groundwork, that development would be moving forward. But is there any sense of whether there's anything already agreed to or tentatively agreed to or any commitments made by companies?
We don't have specific companies to describe. Sorry, this is Jeff Lambert, Community Development Director. We don't have specific companies to articulate tonight, but I know that schedule that the applicant described really tells the city that they expect to have actually developers in line as soon as the tentative map is in place so that they can move forward. And oftentimes developers, as Scott Yules mentioned, put the infrastructure in place because it makes the land more valuable to those real estate transactions. But I suspect the momentum will happen as soon as the tentative map is approved.
Understood. And so the developer, for their own interests, wouldn't be moving forward with these steps, the costs associated with them, without having something in play. And that's really on the developer, and it's not necessarily our business.
That's right.
It's all them.
Yeah, that's correct.
Great. Thank you, Director Lambert.
Thank you, Commissioner Meyer. Anyone else? Okay.
Madam Chair.
So, I'm sorry, who's speaking? Oh, Commissioner Chavez.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Yes, Director Lambert, quick question. Is it within the scope of this commission to reduce that 15 down to 10 years?
And the commission could make a recommendation to council on the term. The entire development agreement is before the commission, including the term provision. And if the commission wanted to make a specific recommendation different than either staff's recommendation or the applicant's, you could include that as part of your forwarding the item to council. So yes.
Now the 15-year, was that something that both staff and the developer agreed on, or was that something that staff just felt was comfortable?
Well, we had several conversations. It was one of the key points of the development agreement negotiations. That's where staff felt comfortable. The developer asked for 20, and staff asked for 15 with a 1 10-year extension possibility.
Got it. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Director Lambert. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do you have Vice Chair Sanchez with us? No. Okay. So any other input? All right. Well, then at this point, I'd move the recommended action on L3.
Pardon me, Chair?
I've got a motion on the table now. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair.
Sure.
I did notice just a couple of areas where there was maybe missing punctuation that made it a little unclear in parts of the
resolution,
the track map and development agreement checklist.
Yeah. Mr. Kollwitz,
that or no?
Mr. Kollwitz, could you please address that? I already spoke with Mr. Kollwitz about this. And on the punctuation, he was just going in the final resolution. I know there are some misplaced commas and some words put in that didn't belong. So I edited that and I already gave that to Mr. Kollwitz with the final resolution draft there. Nothing substantive. But Mr. Kollwitz, would you like to comment?
Yeah, Chair Frank, for the benefit of the commission, I will point out the two small edits and then talk about the third one. In the development agreement resolution on packet page 568, there was the word in was is recommended to be deleted, and there was another typo where the word and was written where it should have been an. I could bring up the specific sentences if the entire commission would like to see them, but those are unsubstantial edits, I would say, and we can make those as administrative efforts going forward. Jumping forward to page 570, there was an edit to, still within the development agreement resolution, the final paragraph before section 4 begins. It says the Planning Commission finds the address improved city policies and adaptive mitigation measures. The words address improved don't seem to belong in that sentence, so it was a typo that should have been deleted. So there's a recommendation that the Planning Commission finds the city policies and adaptive mitigation measures are not considerably different, so on and so forth, is how the sentence would read. We would make that requested edit to that section. And in the very end of the development agreement resolution, in section 5, there's a reference to the development agreement itself being attached as Exhibit 1 to the resolution, and the sentence should have ended there. It then continues with a reference to the road naming request and says, subject to the attached conditions of approval. There aren't any conditions of approval at the end of to the development agreement, so we would also recommend striking that. But those are the edits that we saw, and we would recommend pulling back.
Commissioner Meyer?
My only edits were actually in earlier in the packet, so they weren't actually in the development agreement itself or the final resolution. So if anything earlier than that does not require edits, then we can skip those.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, that is correct.
Commissioner Chavez, I'm sorry. Commissioner Chavez.
Madam Chair, I'll just second your motion. I'll second your motion.
We have a motion by Frank. Thank you. We have a motion by Frank, a second by Chavez. Can we have roll call, please? Let's have roll call.
Chair Frank?
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez?
Aye.
Commissioner Dozier?
Yes.
Commissioner Fearing?
Yes.
Commissioner Meyer?
Yes.
And confirming whether we have Vice Chair Sanchez? Motion passes.
Thank you very much. We'll move to our next agenda item, study session reports. There better not be any study sessions out of this.
That is correct. There are no study session or reports.
Thank you. Item H, Planning Commission business. So I have some business. So commissioners, how did you enjoy this assignment? What did you think? What could have made it better for you, easier for you?
It was an overwhelming amount of material to work through in the time allowed. So another additional week would have been helpful.
You know what would have been helpful for me would have been to put dividers between the pages so that I knew what I was looking at.
I agree, Madam Chair. I was going to say something similar to that. Whereas this amount of data, I really think it should, ideally we should have covered maybe 2 planning sessions with this. The first, the presentation, and if in the future, if we get a package this big, I would like the staff's recommendation and the conditions discussed more thoroughly, because all the stuff in between those two is research data, and we can kind of find a lot of the questions, answers to questions we might have. But if they focus more on the staff presentation and the conditions, I think that would be helpful, because that's how I approached it. I went to those 2 areas and then backtracked to the others.
Yeah, well, like I said last meeting, the devil's in the details, especially when we're looking at a 2012 specific plan, and you have to evaluate it in terms of 2020. And I found the adaptive mitigation portion of this paperwork fascinating, as well as the projected 2023 traffic flow studies. But I didn't know what was in this packet, so I spent about an hour and a half flipping through the pages and then tagging them myself in the sections. So I could go right to the resolution, I could go right to the traffic studies. Right? You did the same thing. Okay. Yeah, good. Okay. any other comments about this process or suggestions
Yeah,
for the future?
Yeah, I actually appreciated the advice Scott gave us about tackling this packet. So thank you very much, Scott, for that.
Very good. Okay, community development staff updates.
We have a very brief one for you. You've all earned time off for good behavior, so no meeting on June 4th, so enjoy that evening. Your next meeting will be June 18th, and that's the totality of our comments.
Thank you. Commissioners, we stand adjourned. Have a great evening.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, thank you, staff.
I'm sorry.
Just thank you.
Okay.
And we'll see you in June.
Yes, you will. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.